Good morning and welcome to the Ditton Works YouTube channel. Today I'm going to talk about another British pair of speakers. Although a British company, these ones say made in China on the back, which is a sign of the times. A lot of speakers, albeit from British manufacturers, the actual production is in China. Why I picked these particular ones is these have some technology that is filtered down from the higher end models from this particular company. Another good example of this would be Bowers & Wilkins, their Nautilus loaded tweeter on the very famous snail shell enclosure from the actual Nautilus. You can find the Nautilus loaded tweeters on even the sort of mid-range and some of the entry-level models. Also their flow port technology, which is the inside out sort of golf ball base port designed for the higher end models. You can find that on some of the more entry-level models. Now what we've got here is a pair of Kef C3s, and this technology I'm talking about is this here, which is a Tangerine Waveguide. Now I believe I first saw this on the Kef LS50 on their UniQ array. So you've got the bass driver with the tweeter right in the middle, and normally that was open so you could see the tweeter, but on the LS50 it had this waveguide. I think they call it a tangerine waveguide because when you're looking down it looks like the segments of a tangerine. And the idea with this is it sort of acts like a compression driver. So when a dome is moving, a tweeter dome, the differences in speed between the outer edge and the center are different, and this waveguide corrects that. It's quite clever how it works. So I thought, let's have a listen to these. They're not particularly expensive. They weren't particularly expensive when they were new. And let's just see or hear if any of these filtered down technologies actually work on a cheaper model. Something else that these have got, which is not that easy to see on the camera, but it's got this here, which is a sort of slot port. Rather than being a hole, or some of them are very flared holes or just cut holes in the back of a cabinet, this is like a slot. And I think the idea being that the sound waves inside get all built up inside the cabinet and then travel out the front of this lower port. It also means you can make the speaker smaller, the enclosure smaller, because you've got a large hole, but it's not round, making a lot of baffle space, or putting it on the rear, which can affect how close you can put some of these speakers to the wall. So I picked these up. Kef, what are we? We've got Kef C3, and they're 8 ohms, 10 to 125 watts, made in China. Let's have a closer look there. So most of you will see this enormous dome in the middle of this bass driver here, which gives them a kind of tough appearance. They look like they're a good, strong, hardy speaker. Pretty cheap and very hollow sounding cabinet. Baffle is just this sort of plasticky affair touched on the front, but they look reasonably attractive even with the grills off. And I'm afraid there is where the good things kind of end. So we've got interesting slot port, Tangerine Waveguide, fairly tough, reasonably aesthetically pleasing speakers. So I checked out some of the hi-fi reviews, and they got pretty bad reviews, to be honest with you. And I thought, they can't be that bad. They're made by Kef. So I picked them up yesterday, and I plugged them in, checked they work, and I thought they sounded okay, to be honest with you. They weren't harsh, they weren't ridiculously boomy, not too bad. Went about the rest of my evening, had dinner this morning. I've plugged them in again, and this is quite interesting. These are a modern speaker. I'm used to fairly vintage speakers. Most of my speakers are from the late 80s or early 90s, and even some of the other ones I've had are older designs that have been brought up to date. These are a very modern design, and if you play modern music, they sound okay. But I put BB.King on, and it's a particularly good live recording that I love listening to. You get a real ambience, a real feeling of being actually there with this recording. The musical instrument positioning, his voice, particularly his guitar playing, which he's obviously famous for, sound pleasant on most of the speakers I have. So, modern music, these sounded fine. As soon as I put BB.King on, wow, he was so forward, it was like, well, just unrealistic. That's the only way I can put it. that if you were standing in a crowd watching him play, then the rest of the band were miles behind him, absolutely miles. Or you got the impression that the sound engineer who was doing the PA equipment decided, do you know what, I'm going to put BB.King's mic at 10 and everybody else at 3. So interesting. Modern speakers, modern music, they seem to work. Modern speakers with older music, and his voice in that is quite hard. You know, you definitely get the feeling that the microphone is being pushed. You definitely get the feeling he's singing his heart out. It's a very, very emotional performance, but it's quite unlistenable on these Kefs. And I think perhaps that is where some of these poor reviews come from. That these were aimed, no serious, I don't like to use the word audiophile, but nobody who's seriously into hi-fi would probably consider buying something at this level. But somebody who is getting into the hobby might. And I think that would probably put them off buying anything else if they thought that this was what you were going to get for your money. I'm not going to bother demoing them because they're just not worth listening to through this camera phone. You just have to take it from me that on modern music, they don't sound too bad. Vintage, forget it. It's borderline unlistenable. Classical music was okay, but what we're really suffering from here is a very boxy sound. The tweeter, the Tangerine Waveguide, is obviously doing something because the top end, the HF, is fairly pleasant. It's not harsh, it's not hard. I was expecting it to be so as a metal dome tweeter, but it's pretty good. It's actually fairly decent. But where the faults lie here is they may have filtered down some technology from the top of the range speakers with this Tangerine Waveguide, and the slot port, you can't hear that. It's not an obviously ported speaker, but the cabinet is just so cheap, and I haven't even looked inside them to see what the crossover is like, but you can bet your bottom dollar that's cheap as well. So what I'm going to do, as my son likes quite a lot of modern music, dance music, and does play his speakers quite hard, I'm going to give them to him because he will love those. He will think they're ideal, and they are ideal for that type of music. They're pretty small and compact, and you can get them reasonably close to a wall. So they're not all bad news, but realistically, sometimes cheap speakers are cheap for a reason. They're just not particularly good. And that's a tragedy coming from a company such as Kef, who in the past have made some cracking speakers. And the LS50 is a pretty good speaker. I haven't heard the Meta, the newest one. I'll try and get my hands on a pair of those at some point. But the original LS50 is a very, very good speaker, which has that Tangerine Waveguide. But it's that UniQ array. You can tell the cabinet's had some serious thought put into it. And it's a lot more money. It's 10 times the price that these were pretty much when they were new. However, you can pick these up second-hand for way less than 10 times the value of a second-hand pair of Kef LS50s. Anyway, that's the Ditton Works review for today. Pointless me playing them because, take it from me, they are very, very hard in the mid-range. They're very forward in the mid-range. The top end's okay and the low end's okay. So for female vocals or vocalist music, not particularly good. Anyway, guys, take care. I'll catch up with you later.